it's the very fundamentals of our mimetic DNA, if you will. And so a manner of preserving that is by taking and compartmentalizing, and then also preserving that which is most pure by creating items in that will kind of keep them repelling at a distance, so that there's not as likely to be an interaction between two groups. And it's not because one group is forever condemned and the other group is blessed regardless of what they do. That's not it at all. It's to keep them apart so that the contaminations that are had by one at one time don't spread to the whole. But likewise, it's so that if the other side gets contaminated, there's the chance of purifying the other side, or vice versa. Because the more diversity you have, if you're approaching this again from just the view of evolution, even if it's just mimetic evolution, is you've got a diversity of places in which things can be reposited, and you've got things mimetic drift, if you will. Different components that in genetics are used to promote both diversity and then to maintain realms in which you don't get some species that develops to a point and then just gets wiped out because it doesn't, there's nothing there to keep it from getting wiped out, because there's so much homogenization. But you have things both scattered on one hand, but then you also have things that are repelling each other. And in this way, you're able to move things from one place to another and preserve them. And again, this isn't necessarily just the preservation or even inherently the preservation of genetic material, but it also ties into the ideas, the preservation and continuation and of the ideas. Because if anybody will really look at the Book of Mormon, and I don't believe anybody that really reads it and understands what it is actually saying and the whole story and the whole context can call it racist in the least. When they oversimplify it, like Shazulu does, he'll say, "Oh well, the Lamanites were evil and the Nephites were good." If you believe that, you've never read the Book of Mormon, or if you read it, you didn't understand a thing. Because the Book of Mormon is pointing out that the hats change all the time. People are wearing different hats all the time. The fact that the Lamanites started out with the wicked traditions doesn't mean that's the hat that stayed on them, and it doesn't mean that the fact that they had the dark skin, it kind of ties in too, because I realized this when I was watching The Lord of the Rings, and it's just in pop culture. It's in culture in general. We have this thing where we try to just set up, the bad guys are bleh, and the good guys are but that's the point of the Book of Mormon, is it isn't like that. But that's what everybody misses, and that's where the whole problem with assuming that that simply because somebody has had a curse, and because their parents had a curse, and because they have dark skin, it doesn't make them less of an individual. And simply because you're born of if you have Moses, if you have Abraham to your fathers, as the Pharisees would say to Jesus, and Jesus responded, well, God can, make out of these rocks seed of Abraham. The whole point of the Bible and the Book of Mormon is that these compartments that are made to benefit us, but they don't define us. They just don't. They are components of preserving and of affecting the plan that God has for us. I'm not saying I understand the whole thing of why everything is the way it is. And we're going to get a bit more into the whole idea of an arbitrary placement of people in chosen and unchosen positions a bit later on here. But just to look at that God isn't, He hasn't set up the system because He's some, psycho dictator that just likes to see things in chaos. There's a rhyme and a reason to this, and it's a rhyme and a reason, and it's an affecting of a plan without forcing people, without forcing anyone to do good or forcing anyone to do bad. it all remains open, but the way it remains open is through these things that are set up, through these constructs. And that's how I believe the whole plan has been prepared, and the whole idea of the family and having something preserved, a remnant. If you look in the Bible, the remnant is a constant theme, a righteous remnant, the righteous remnant coming through it after all of the times that Jerusalem was come in and wiped out and taken away, and there's remnants in the scattering even. It's all tied into God ultimately preserving and ultimately redeeming all of mankind. Now moving on, there's also an element too as far as maintaining patterns and ultimate archetypes, and that ties again to mimetic and taking the best you can of the ideas and preserving those and presenting those. And you get that both in the Book of Mormon and the Bible. If you look at one of the greatest prophets mentioned in the Book of Mormon is a Lamanite, Samuel the Lamanite. And Jesus Christ demonstrates the same thing in this parable. Who is neighbor unto the man? And it was the Samaritan, the half-breed, the one that all the Jews looked down on. These separations were made to accentuate and to perpetuate the best, and to perpetuate the archetype in spite of whatever starting position we were in. Now moving on to another feature, which is something that I believe sets apart our view. Now, a lot of people will look at the Mormon view of blacks, and a lot of times it's been put forward this whole teaching of there was those who were kind of on the fence in heaven, and that's the posterity that was out there, or everybody that was on the fence in heaven came down and was cursed, and because of that, the seed of Cain and oftentimes tied with the black race. There's elements to that I don't think are completely understood. Now, to demonstrate this, we're talking about the accusations made by many of the militant atheists today against the God of the Bible, is this whole idea that he's a racist. He's dividing people up, he's setting chosen people here, he's got inferior people, servants, and even if you look at Christ taught that servants were supposed to be submissive to their master. So it was this continuation, the seeming condoning of having a master and a slave. But what they don't understand, though, is that the things that were set up here weren't done arbitrarily. God wasn't just doing this, but this is a problem that a lot of our Christian brethren run into, is because if there wasn't a pre-earth life, if there wasn't a pre-mortality, if you read Jeremiah the way they before I formed thee in the womb I knew thee and sanctified thee, if you believe that doesn't mean that we had a pre-mortal life, then God is arbitrary because he's setting people up. But there's something interesting, because Origen